Hey guys, how are you? I am so excited. My book finally came. It's so awesome. This week we are doing Poor Things by Alasdair Gray. I waited 2 months for this thing. Took 3 orders to get it because the whole stock seemed to have been wiped out because of the film. And I couldn't get a hold of it. And so it took 2 months. I've spent the past 2 weeks reading it, and now I'm ready to tell you about it. But before we get there, remember, there is our shop where we have books and writing services. There's also our Redbubble shop, which has over 100 designs. If you want to support us, that's how you do it. If you want to support us but don't want to spend money, like, subscribe, comment, share. So many different ways that you can support us. We love comments. We love when people subscribe. It's always exciting. We really love when people buy stuff. It's really exciting too. So that's how you support us. And now on to Poor Things. This book took me so long to get. I actually read 2 of his other books while I was waiting for this. That's how long it took me to get this thing. Oh, I heard. Now this is going to be on the book. I'm not going to really talk about the film. I'm going to make a little bonus video to go and talk about what I thought of the film. So we're going to be talking about the book. So when I heard that a film was being made, I thought, how on earth do you film an Alasdair Gray novel? Because I'd already read Lanark. And I just thought, these things aren't filmable. And I actually, this book arrived in the post the same day that I bought tickets for the film. And I opened it up and went, yeah, this thing ain't filmable. This thing is not filmable. Which it turns out that was like the best thing ever, because this is the kind of book that you very rarely see, and that I read it and I absolutely adored it because it has so much in it. And I think that explains why, in spite of the fact that all the copies got pretty much bought out very quickly, there aren't videos on it, because it's kinda hard. Remember what I said about close readings of texts? You can't close read this thing. This has so many little links, so much stuff in it. You close read this thing, you're going to have the massive case of cognitive dissonance as the whole thing breaks your brain. Fortunately, I don't do close readings. So, what is this? Poor Things purports to be a found document. A document found among papers thrown out for collection in the 1970s in Glasgow from a lawyer's office. And this curator of this, the man who finds the papers is the curator of an arts and museum in Glasgow that is trying to preserve the lost the history of Glasgow that is disappearing under the modernization that is occurring under the during the 70s under the Labour government. The museum ends up being closed under the Thatcherite government. This book is from 1992. Okay, so the museum itself ends up closed under Thatcher. Yeah, this is going to get political. I'm just going to warn you there. This is going to get really political. But the curator, this guy who's found these documents, he turns to Alasdair Gray, the novelist and muralist, to help him verify this story and to get it published. The original book by Archibald McCandle, which Poor Things reproduces, The bulk of the book is made up by this book called Episodes from the Early Life of a Scottish Public Health Officer, Archibald McCandless, MD, Etchings by William Strange. This is the bulk of the book is made up of this. This is the found document. In the introduction, Gray argues that the letter that was found with the book should be, whether it should be published first or second, whether it will privilege or prejudice the reader of the McCandless story is debated. The letter ends up going into the back of the book because throughout the process of having the book published, the McCandless book published, the author and the discoverer, the author, Alasdair Gray, and the curator of the museum fall out over whether they believe this is truth or fiction. There are extended notes in the back which are there to verify the historical truth of McCandless's story, which is really fun. We'll get to them. But so you get this book. They also fall out because the original copy of the book, the one that is reproduced here, was lost at some point in the reproduction process between printer and printer and publisher, and the original artifact has been lost, which causes a falling out between curator and editor. We then move into McCandless's narrative. McCandless's narrative tells us briefly who he is. He is the illegitimate son of a servant and a laird, or a big landholder. I'm not sure if he's actually a laird, but he's the unacknowledged illegitimate son. When his mother dies, she gives him what money she has saved and tells him to go and do good in the world to become a doctor. When he's at the university, he gets he comes to the attention of Godwin Baxter, or Godwin Baxter comes to his attention. They meet, and Godwin Baxter is, while a brilliant surgeon, a very, very peculiar individual. He is 5 times as wide as a normal man. He has a huge voice that's shrill like a factory whistle. He is huge. He is gargantuan. He is Rabelaisian in his proportions. He eats strange food, as if his body can't assimilate food properly. He has odd hands, and he is the son of Sir Clive Baxter, a brilliant surgeon from Glasgow. This is where this book starts to meld things that are true and things that are false. Clive Baxter is a real person. Now, Godwin Baxter, the name Godwin is not a coincidence, those of you who know your Mary Shelley. Godwin Baxter is this brilliant surgeon. He is beyond any sort of medical abilities. He is allowed at the university partly on the reputation of his father, and he does assist at times, but he doesn't practice because his monstrous appearance frightens off the genteel paying clients. So when he practices medicine, he practices it out of the factory infirmary for the assistance of the poor, the needy, the people who cannot have any choice about who serves them, because it's a choice of either Godwin Baxter or no medical care at all. The irony being that Godwin Baxter can give them incredibly fine medical care. Godwin has been experimenting, in his terms, refining his father's technique one of his experiments is cutting rabbits in half, a black rabbit and a white rabbit, Flopsy and Mopsy, and sewing them onto the opposite, making this weird female-male hybrid of each of the rabbits, which he is going to reverse because it's not very, the rabbits don't really like it and they've stopped having sex, so that was this chief entertainment. So he's kind of, yeah, that was, I'm going to reverse that. But McCandless is absolutely astonished by this. Now, later, McCandless is introduced to what is Godwin's finest creation. Because McCandless, they do fall out over McCandless looking at what Godwin can achieve and saying, my God, you could revolutionize medicine. People would pay a fortune. I could be your publicity in the world. But Godwin refuses to do this. Why? Because in order to treat one high-paying, wealthy person, how many of the poor that he treats would go without medical care? He has a very generous nature and he does not see glory and fame and wealth. His father has already left him a huge fortune as motivating factors. But what he wants is a companion. You're starting to understand where we're going here? This is Frankenstein and the Bride of Frankenstein. But unlike Frankenstein, Clive Baxter loved his creature. Godwin Baxter is the creature. And Godwin Baxter creates initially his intention is to create a bride. He takes the body of a drowned woman who was also pregnant and replaces the drowned woman's brain with the fetus's brain, and therefore creates what he hopes will be a bride, an adult body, but able to grow up with him and therefore not find him hideous and frightening. But what he creates is a daughter who doesn't have those feelings for him, no matter how much he wishes it, because he is her father. Like any parent, he is forced to accept that his daughter will be her own person. There are so many bits and pieces just in the very beginning of the story. There's like Birkenhair, the resurrectionist. There is so much Scotland. So every other page, part of the reason this thing took me 2 weeks to read was every other page I was having to sort of stop and go, oh my God, what are we, there's this and there's this and there's this and there's this, and I'm so many things. I'll try to do as many of them as I can possibly remember. So he takes Bella, as he calls her, because she is no longer the woman that she was. She is a whole new being. He takes Bella and takes her around the world to help facilitate her growth, because she is growing at a remarkable rate. She's growing at this remarkable rate. And when McCandless sees them again, after a year of travel, he is so taken by her, he proposes marriage to her, which she accepts. But this doesn't stop her deciding she would like to have an adventure with Duncan Wedderburn, whom Godwin meets because he has difficulty in explaining the existence of Bella to his old solicitor, and therefore goes in search of a new one, who is so taken by Bella that he wishes to elope with her. But Bella has other ideas. Bella has completely other ideas, and it turns out that Bella is going to utterly exhaust Wedder, as she calls him. She also develops this trip, whereas the trip she took with Baxter was a childhood and a growth. This is her growing out of childhood, her emergence as a fully fledged adult. So Weda takes her around Europe. It turns out, he believes she's a fiend who cannot sleep. He refers to her as a witch. Scotland, of course, like Germany, was one of the hotbeds of witch trials. I believe the Scots recently just pardoned every woman killed or imprisoned as a witch. So it was particularly vicious in Scotland. Much like in Germany, it was particularly vicious. There are all these little nuggets all over the place. It's just, love it. And this is just the first bit. So she exhausts Weda, but on her travels, she discovers the injustices of the world. And this is something that is, okay, we have Scotland, we have identity, and then we have colonialism. Because Bella is Scotland. Bella is Scotland. Bella, the infant Bella, is Scotland subsumed inside the larger body of Great Britain. No coincidence that her mother's body is called Victoria. These are so... This whole thing is a nesting doll of intricacy. So in her travels around the world, or around Europe, she goes as far as Edessa and Alexandria and Greece, and then returns to France and Glasgow. In her journeys around here, she meets two characters, Sir Astley and Dr. Hooker. Sir Astley is he's a capitalist, he's an industrialist, he's looking for new markets. Dr. Hooker is an American missionary. These are two arms of the colonial project. We will meet the third arm of the colonial project later on. But Dr. Astley and Dr. Hooker seek to educate Bella in the way of the world. Their education doesn't go quite as planned. So they explain to Bella how the world works, that the world is there to be pacified by the Anglo-Saxon race, and Bella and to be converted from heathenism, and that this should be done by the English and the Americans, and that the rest of Europe is essentially descending forms of savagery. The rest of the world is just savagery that must be quelled, suppressed, and then ruled with the benevolence of English rule and Christianity. Now, Bella is not terribly impressed by this, but it does help her to understand that she's complicit in this system. She cannot see the system until these two men explain it for her, putting themselves obviously in the best possible light, and show her the rampant poverty of Alexandria that she is held aloof from by the imperialist project of Great Britain. Because Scotland is complicit within the imperial project. They are not the innocent victim of the imperialist project and colonialism, but an active player that is gaining benefit by their participation. Alasdair Gray is not in any way, shape or form going to let his people off the hook for their complicity in colonialism, which is fascinating because this is not the Scotland of longhorned cattle and shortbread and Sir Walter Scott. This is a really hard, clean look at Scotland and the complicity of Scotland in the oppression of other peoples around the world. It's a fascinating book. And so Bella, in her realization of her complicity and the sight of the poverty in Alexandria, attempts to help. She attempts to help a a single person. She is already starting to wonder what happened to her baby, because Weta tells her that the scar that she has meant that she'd had a baby. She assumed all women had a cesarean scar, but no. What happens? Well, until now she has believed that because the world is good, like a child, that therefore her baby, though lost, would be somewhere. Now faced with the utter cruelty and indifference of the world, she now she not only wonders where her baby is, she wants to help. She wants to do something, and she does it in a very like a teenager suddenly discovering politics in the most unsophisticated but deeply passionate way, which results in her biting Ashley and the beginnings of her political awakening. He attempts to then educate her in the way the world works, but the lessons that she takes are not the ones that he wishes her to take. She is very much he's very much taken with her and has fallen in love with her, which makes Weta jealous. Weta is basically incredibly off about this now. He's very off her. He's not happy. He's also been gambling, and he ruins himself with his gambling. It's not Bella's fault. He's an idiot. But she has no interest in marrying Ashley. She wishes to return to McCandless. So all of this is occurring in two letters that Archibald and Godwin are reading. One is a letter from Weta, one is a letter from Bella herself. When they return to France, they have no money. Well, actually, they have money. Bella has money in her coat. She's got the money Godwin gave her. But she is absolutely thoroughly sick and tired of Weta and sends him back to Scotland with her money. And she works for a few days, 3 days, before she gets sick of working in the brothel. She does work in the brothel for 3 days. It's fairly minor. She learns in the brothel about the exploitation of women, about the way that women's entire self, especially their bodies, are another capitalist consumer product. And eventually she decides to return to Godwin and McCandless in Scotland, which she does via the help of a friend that she had met on her first travels with Godwin around France, around the world. When she returns home, she returns home, decides that she has decided that she is a socialist, and she decides she wants to help people. She's going to become a doctor, and in particular, she's going to become a doctor for women's reproductive health. That is what she is interested in women and babies. And Godwin encourages her in this. When it comes time for her and McCandless to marry, then we meet her old husband, her first husband. Her first husband, if Astley was commerce and Dr. Hooker was the missionary, here comes the third arm of the imperialist juggernaut, military. Astley has talked about the importance of military in pacifying the natives. Then we meet the third arm in the form of Sir Aubrey Blessington. General Blessington. General Blessington, it has made his career in the outer rim, on the edges of the empire, brutally suppressing any uprising against British rule, allowing for the complete exploitation of the capitalists. We also meet Lady Blessington, Victoria Blessington's father, a Manchester capitalist who has used his daughter as a pawn in his own game of rising in wealth and power. Both of these men, they see her as another site in which they can dominate and exert their power over her body, that the bodies of women are another place for capitalist and imperialist control. And she ultimately tells him, having revealed that he is a hypocrite because he was one of the masked men in the brothel in France, she tells him to F off. Go away. Not interested. And having been defied by this, he doesn't live very much longer. She rejects their world utterly and moves into a life with McCandless, and Godwin is now dying. But he has a child who will live after him. He has Bella. And Bella has chosen to be Bella, not Victoria. Bella has actively broken away from Britain. Scotland is Scotland. Scotland has chosen itself out against the power of being part of Britain. She has decided to be this person, this independent being. Yeah, he was a really strong Scottish nationalist. He has 2 books, and one of which is at least 2 books arguing for independence of Scotland, one of which is called Why the Scots Should Rule Scotland. So if you questioning his politics there, it's like, no, he's definitely a Scottish independence. So that's the bulk of the narrative. Posthumous to the narrative, we hear a letter from not Bella, but a woman who calls herself Victoria McCandless, the first female doctor in Scotland, and talking about the fact that her husband is a bit of a fabulist and that he has made the whole thing up, and she's not entirely certain why he's made that up, apart from the fact that maybe, just maybe, that she and Godwin intimidated him and he felt the need to diminish them. She doesn't deny that she was the wife of General Blessington and the daughter of the Manchester industrialist who treated her and her mother exceedingly poorly. She doesn't deny that General Blessington treated her abysmally and that she ran away from him and had a whole new life in Scotland with Godwin and McCandless. She, however, denies the fact that she is a Frankenstein's monster, made up of mother and child, which, yes, she's not going to buy that. And so her narrative ends at the beginning of 1914. Then we get to the notes. So you have this introduction that problematizes the book to begin with, as in this is a found document and that there was a controversy over whether this is fiction or truth. Then you have the document itself, which is fantastical, gothic, critical, political, just so. Oh. And then you have the letter. So you create one reading, then you problematize that reading, but then you remember the introduction, which further problematizes both texts, and then we get the notes in the back, which further problematize both the Victoria Candleless letter and at the same time confirm elements of the McCandless narrative. If you want a nice tidy thing, the cognitive dissonance of these layers of narrative and problematizing of ownership of story are just going to break your brain. So in the notes we discover notes about people who are actually real and notes about the subsequent life of the characters. We know about the death of Godwin, we know about the death of McCandless, but in the notes we find out about the full extent of the life of Bella Victoria McCandless, who by the last piece is said the last thing that we get, because Alasdair Gray has absolutely no desire to provide you with closure or a neat, tidy thing or anything that would say, this is how you read this book. He says, Dr. Victoria McCandless was found dead of a cerebral stroke on the 3rd of December 1946. Reckoning from the birth of her brain in the Humane Society mortuary on Glasgow Green, 18th of February 1880, she was exactly 66 years, 40 weeks and 4 days old. Reckoning from the birth of her body in a Manchester slum in 1854, she was 92. Alasdair Gray is not going to tell you which story to believe. And that Russian doll quality of Bella Victoria is actually really interesting, because how are we, as I said, I put on a Scottish lens to read him, because having read now 4 of his books, that's the appropriate lens, I feel, to read his books, because I read 2 others that I will be bringing you. But when do you date Scotland? At what point do you date Scotland as its independence prior to the State of the Union? Do you date Scotland as Union when Scotland becomes, in some ways, the fetus inserted into the mother's body? The fetus brain inserted into the mother's body? Do you date Scotland as a new independent nation in terms of pulling away from the mother? How do you date this? How do you identify yourself? Is Scotland nothing more than a tourist trap and an industrial centre? Or does it have an actual identity? It is no coincidence that Scotland is exemplified by a female body. Is a female body only a site of male productivity, a childbearing, nurturing thing that is there to be exploited or sexually exploited? Or is a woman an independent, thinking, autonomous being? There is so much complexity and density in this. This is the kind of book I really, really love. This is the kind of book you very, very rarely see. These don't come around very often. And when they do come around, they're not always very well done. This is a really great example of this kind of experimental writing. And if you're thinking, you just wrecked the plot for me, that's not why you read the book. You figure out what the plot's going to be in the first few pages. It's like, oh, this is Frankenstein. This is Frankenstein, but mixed with a bit of Young Frankenstein, because remember, in Young Frankenstein, the key to resolving the monster is love. It is love, and it allows both Frankenstein and, or Frankenstein, as he would prefer, and the monster to live as humans, fully human. And so is it a great, huge surprise that this is what this story is? No. The number of little things that he puts in that you then go, oh, is astonishing. You are never outright told that Godwin Baxter is a creature, but it becomes pretty obvious that he is a creature. He's not put together right, and he's a prototype of which he is able to use to build a daughter. Here is a Scottish identity that can be rebuilt and reborn in a much stronger, more durable way in the daughter. That the future of Scottish identity will no longer be a hodgepodge of broken, ill-fitting parts, but could become a seamlessly integrated whole if it can only get its independence. Fascinating book, bears no resemblance beyond an early conceit to the film. I'm not going to talk about the film here. As I said, I will do a separate video about the film and put that up as well. But you have to see this book. It is so good. There are so many little bits and pieces. Like, you're reading it and it's like, oh, Boswell. Oh, now I have to go read Boswell's Life of Johnson. And actually the quality of Johnson that Boswell sees is what you see in Godwin Baxter. Some people have said that the relationship between McCandless and Godwin is like Sherlock Holmes and Watson, which it is, but I would also say that it is like the relationship between Boswell and Johnson, the great genius and the, even in his own day, the bootlicker running after him, who records his life. Because Boswell's a flopsy bunny. Her ladyship has already talked about that. She already told you, go have a look at her Boswell Scotland video if you don't believe me. And also have a look at her Johnson's Highlands. Because, yeah. So it depends on which thing you are, depends on which links are going to get lit up. But that, of course, is how being a reader works. I'm not a big Sherlock Holmes fan, so I read it in a slightly different way, a different pair, which is also referenced in the book. A lot of other people would probably, because of the lack of general knowledge of Boswell and Johnson, might skip over that and see it in that Watson-Sherlock mode. There is so much in here. Is so dense, is so beautifully written. Have a look at it. It is so good. So good. Anyway, that is Poor Things. You could just mine this thing for ages. It's wonderful. That's Poor Things. Peace and love, guys. I'll be back with something else another time. Probably not as good as this, because... But anyway, peace and love, guys. I'm glad I was finally able to bring this for you. Peace and love. If you would like to support this channel, come across to the Black Cockie Press website, www.blackcockiepress.com.au, where you will find books and other writing services to help with your writing.